Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Cliff Gray of FlatTops Wilderness Guides. Cliff, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Yeah, I look forward to having you on here. Sounds like you got a little bit of the Colorado crud. I know I was sick at the Western Hunting Expo, or afterwards, I should say, and you're up there, I know, in that Gypsum, Colorado area, and sounds like you've got a little bit of the crud. Are you on the mend?
Yeah, no, I'm on the upswing. I just picked it up for my kids. It seems like everybody around here has got it, but your listeners will probably have to bear with a little coughing into the microphone, but at least it won't come to the speakers and get them, I'm sure. But so should be good. But no, I'm on the upswing. You know how it is, right? What do they say? Mountain climbers look the worst on the descent, right? So I'm almost out of it. I just sound the worst that it's been so far.
So where are we at with conditions up there? I left a week or so ago, and lots and lots of snow. Looking like a great year. Man, we've needed it up there. It's been dry. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so I would say, if you look at the last 5 or 6 years, this is for sure the heaviest snowpack that I've seen, at least in this part of the mountains. We were coming off probably the least I'd seen in my whole life. In 2018. So it's good. Like, we for sure needed the water. The last 2 or 3 weeks we've had big melt-offs too. So I think the winter range is, okay. Yesterday I was up at the ranch, and there's quite a few mule deer down low, and they seem to be good body condition. The only thing I can think of, I just don't know what'll end up happening is if you looked at the browse and stuff going into winter and late fall, there's just very little growth on it because it was so dry. So I think for us we're probably okay, but I don't know how southern Colorado will fare. I'm not that up on the Gunnison Basin, that sort of thing, but I would think that in some of the drier parts of Colorado, like down in Pagosa, that area, the deer in particular probably didn't go into winter with great body condition, and then now they're facing a fair amount of snow. So I don't know. I think it probably matters a lot between what happens between now and May.
Yeah, for sure. We've got the April 2nd deadline for the Colorado regulations kind of staring us in the face here. We're a couple weeks out, and you're my first podcast that I've done on Colorado. If you would, I know there's been a few changes in Colorado. If you would kind of go over, Colorado in general, just go over in general terms, how their draw works and what have you, and then point out any changes that you see in the regulations that people might need to be aware of.
Yeah, so I'll kind of zip through the main ones because there were some pretty, I wouldn't say drastic, but there's some significant ones that occurred this year, and there was a lot of discussion about it in the last 6 months. So they did make some changes. Probably, honestly, the most important one, Jay, is that the deadline is April 2nd, but it's no longer midnight. It's 8 p.m. So that's probably the most important one for all the procrastinators out there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
are you specifically? I almost felt like you were speaking to me, Cliff.
No, what I'm speaking to is all of the hunters that are going to call me at 9 o'clock on April 2nd and ask me why the website's not working anymore. But anyways,
exactly.
So it's one to keep in mind. But that's a minor change, honestly. So to go through the bigger changes, they did pass this Future Generations bill, which was really primarily a resident license increase. So that did pass. There hadn't been a resident license cost increase in several years. So basically resident tags went up $8. Probably the biggest change that people are going to notice this year is on the points. So there's two of them, and they're both fee related. So on sheep, goat, and moose points, the point fee went to $50 for residents, and it went to $100 for non-residents. And that's drastically different than 2018, when it was like $3 to apply for each one of those species. And The other big change on the fee structure is that now as a non-resident, well, and as a resident, but the cost is not as significant, is that you do have to have a qualifying license. For most people applying for sheep, goat, moose, deer, elk, what they're going to end up doing is buying a small game license to fulfill that requirement. It's basically $80. So those are big changes. 80.
Okay, so
that's 80.
So in order to apply, you have to have a qualifying license, and the cheapest option is the small game license.
Right. And so,
what about a fishing license? Cover that or no?
No, it doesn't. And they have them. They have them listed. They have them listed in there. But the only other one that I think might be of interest to somebody that was like in a bordering state is that a spring turkey license does qualify. So if you come turkey hunting, you might be able to at least utilize the license in that regard. But if you can't, it's basically, I think most non-residents are just going to have to view that as is essentially a fee/cost for applying in Colorado.
So in other words,
does that make sense?
The fees to apply are going up, and you're going to leave some money on the table. It's been very, very easy in years past with the $3 application fee. You've got now just more cost to apply in Colorado.
Yeah, so, and I'll give you like the brief history on it, Jay. What happened was in 2018, non-residents used to have to post up all the money, right, for the tags. So they took that requirement off, and then what they got is they got a huge glut of applications on sheep, goat, and moose. And there was a big kind of outcry from all the people who had a bunch of points. I know also the Outfitters Association was kind of nervous about that also, because basically there was all of a sudden a huge influx in applications for those species in particular because it was so cheap to apply. And it was always cheap to apply, but you had to post the money up, which is a hindrance for most folks. So going into this season, they knew they were going to have to, just because of the pressure from people with points, outfitters, pretty much everybody. The only people that didn't have a problem with it were the people who didn't have any points and were just starting to apply. So most of the community wanted some change, and they for sure were not going to go back to having to post the money up because there was some economic issues with that because they were having to pay credit card fees on both ends of that transaction. And when I say they, I mean the CPW. So that was off the table. So basically these preference point fees and the qualifying license are kind of what they're viewing as a middle ground. It kind of makes it, it's obviously a source of revenue for them, but it also makes you kind of have a fair amount of skin in the game to apply for these points. And that's the happy medium that they got. I think most people are happy with it, to be honest, Jay. But it is, it kind of puts us more in line with the other states, I think, is the reality. And some of the intricacies of that is that there is no longer a point fee for elk and deer. It only applies to sheep, goat, and moose. And then the other thing is you can actually opt out of it. So you can apply, like let's say you have 15 points for sheep. You can apply for sheep as a non-resident, and then when you apply, you can opt out of that preference point fee. So you can still apply with your 15 points, but if you opt out, you don't have to pay the $100 for the point, but you also don't gain it for that year.
Okay. Which should be crazy to do. Why would you do that?
I've had several people kind of figure out the math that I've talked to, and I think really what it is when you look, it's it makes my head hurt when I look at all the math around how the actual weighted point deal works in Colorado. But you can basically figure it out. And the difference between having 16 and 17 points in terms of your probability of drawing a sheep, goat, or moose tag, it's not that significant. It might only, like, let's say, this is like a rough number, Jay, but let's say on the average sheep unit, on the average year, with the average set of applications, somebody with 17 points has probably got an 8 or 9% chance of drawing. Or let's say that they have 8% chance with 16 points, right? If they have 17 points, it might only be like an 8.5% chance. So it's not like there's the difference between 16 and 17 is huge. So it still makes a difference, particularly over time, because you want to climb the ladder. But I think, the only situation I could see is if you say, like, let's say take goat hunting, right? Let's say that you knew that your body just has only got 2 years left of being able to do a goat hunt. You might just say, hey, I'll keep my $200 for the next 2 years and just hopefully I'll draw a tag. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
so
I get
that would be the only. Does that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to cost a little bit more, but you think it's probably a good change, and from people you've talked to, they like the change. I know the people that didn't want to float all of the tag fees and send in those checks for, to hunt. It's definitely, yes, you have a little more upfront cost, but you don't have to float that big money. Any other changes out there?
Yeah, so on that one, we kind of covered the point one. One that I think is kind of overlooked a little bit is that they changed their refund policy a little bit. They actually created a window of what they call reversal, which means that if you draw a tag, so it used to be that if you drew a tag, like let's say you drew 44 tag and you burnt 20 points, right? You find out that you drew it, and then something comes up and you can't go, right? It used to be that you had to choose between paying or eating the cost of the tag or getting your points back in terms of refund, right? And you still had to do it, I think it's 30 or 45 days before the season started, but you had to choose either or, which really for deer tag doesn't matter that much because the tags aren't that expensive, but like for a goat tag it'd be significant, right? A guy drew the tag, he's got to return it for whatever reason, and he'd have to either eat the $2,000 or he'd have to lose all of his points. Now they have a window, so from when you draw to June 14th, you can actually just give him the tag back and you'll get both back, which I think is kind of fair. I mean, stuff happens in life between when you put in for the draw and then when you draw. And the other thing is some guys draw multiple tags. I mean, they get really lucky, but then it's hard to figure out your schedule and stuff. So I think that's kind of nice. You got that basically 2 weeks there where you can get everything back if you need to. So it's something for people to keep in mind. Some other big changes. I mean, to me, one of the biggest changes, Jay, and I'm like, I'm not the most. I would say that I fling a lot of crap at the CPW about their policies and stuff, and I would give them a ton of praise for this one because I know there's some guys, particularly local to my community, that worked on it, and that's that they took non-resident bear tags from $300 to $100, and that's a huge change, and I think it will promote more harvested bears, which I don't take it for granted because it's really hard for these guys to make those kind of changes on predators now. So I have a lot of praise for them on that. And the other thing they did is they changed a lot of those bear tags from A tags to B tags. So in some situations, you can actually get 2 of them. So that's another, they really did take a big step in promoting bear hunting here. And I think that, to me, it was a very pleasant surprise because it means they're not only listening to people at these meetings, but they're also trying to promote some more opportunity in the future, particularly on the elk herd.
Yeah, which is also nice, right in the face of Colorado politics, to be able to do some of those changes, and it's like, okay, we thought they were being swayed by one side so much, and then you come to find out, okay, they're actually going to try and promote the harvest of, getting some more bears harvested, which is, I think, a good thing because I'm hearing from everyone that I know there in Colorado, there in that Roaring Fork Valley, just the bears have just exploded. Actually, all over the state, I'm talking to people, and they're just talking about bears, and the reality is those same bears, the prized Colorado, elk herd is being affected by those bears. So it's refreshing to see that they saw that as an issue, and they addressed that and allowed non-residents to pay a cheaper price, number one. And the fact that I learned over there doing some research around the Odd Six Ranch, like, yeah, you can get 2 different licenses, and one of them being a List B license, and potentially have 2 bear tags in your pocket.
Yeah. And a matter of fact, actually over there, you have to look at it, Jay. I have to look at the actual, but a lot of the private lands, they actually moved to C, so you could actually have that. You could do that, and then you could hunt public too on another tag, so you could potentially have more than 2. But either way, they've really tried to open the availability of that, and I agree with all the points you said. I know we've talked about it before in the past, but I also realize, like, it's hard for these guys to do that. Like, believe me, on that change, somebody is taking some heat within the CPW from non-hunter groups. So I think, you go to these meetings where everybody has an opinion on what the CPW is doing, and most of it is really about, I want my piece of the pie to be bigger than the outfitters, or I want my piece of pie to be bigger than the non-residents, or blah, blah, blah. A lot of like infighting / divvying things up. This policy, to me, is really cool because it's really not about any of that. It's not like the petty stuff about dividing stuff up. It's really about growing the whole pie. And to me, that's a huge, huge change. I mean, these other changes obviously are significant, the monetary ones on the fees and stuff, but to me, that's probably the best change that's made in the whole book. So that's a good one. The other ones, I think, that are more like management related stuff. And if you look through the other changes, most of them, and it's kind of related to this bear thing, most of them are about reducing female elk harvest in certain parts of the state, particularly the mountain ranges that we live in. So there's 2. I mean, the one that's most forthright is that in several of the historical OTC archery units, particularly around like where you live over there in Carbondale and Basalt, and then all the way over here to the Vail Valley, 44, 444, 45, and 47, all those over-the-counter archery tags are no longer either sex. They're bull only. So that's something for people to think about if they hunt this area. And I don't know, I can't speak for them, but I would think that might be the start of something that progresses for, more statewide as a management thing. So that's one, and that's really just about reducing female elk harvest. And then a lot of the other, if you look at through the elk changes, like the combination of units, the changes of cow tags from B units or B licenses to A licenses, all of that is about reducing female harvest of elk in several of these big herds. So the bear thing and that, I think, are 2 pretty significant, biological / management changes that have been made, and I think it's awesome. Might have been a little late, but like I'm not gonna throw crap at people that are trying to get on the right path. So I'm impressed with those. And that really covers the changes, Jay.
Cliff, I probably should have, for those that are listening that maybe, I obviously know you've been on the podcast a bunch, but we probably should take a second here before we dive in a little bit further and get a little bit of background on you and your operation. So if you'd take a second here to tell the listeners a little bit about where you operate and about your operation, to kind of lay the groundwork, where you're coming from.
Yeah. So 95% of my outfitting is in the FlatTops wilderness, and that's in western Colorado, or western central, I guess you'd call it, outside of Vail and Eagle, basically north of the Vail Valley. All of it's wilderness stuff. I shouldn't say all of it, but 95% of it. So it's all pack-in, horse and mule, wilderness hunting trips. Our stuff is on the elk side, very, very much leans towards over-the-counter, high availability of tags, all of that. Our deer is pretty good in that regard too. A lot of seasons we have availability for tags. Some of the later seasons you have to have 3 or 4 points, particularly as a non-resident. But it's all packing stuff into the wilderness, horse and foot-only access. And they're not they're not easy hunts, but I would say that if you think about, if you have any nostalgia for how guys hunted elk 30 or 40 years ago, we're basically doing it the exact same way. It's that type of hunt. I do a little private land stuff in the late seasons, but even then we still hunt a lot of the wilderness. We hunt from our lodge, and we ride into the wilderness and hunt that same stuff. We probably half my business is drop camps, which is we basically pack you into an established wall tent camp. It's got all the gear in there for your hunt, and then we drop you off and you're on your own. It's kind of a do-it-yourself hunt. You hunt on your own, and then we pack elk and deer out for you, and then of course we pack you out at the end of the hunt. The rest of my business is guided stuff. Some of that's out of the lodge, as I said, but most of it's out of the wilderness camp. So we pack into a camp. We hunt from there. Some of that we hunt from the camps hiking. Some of it we hunt daily on horseback. Just kind of depends on the conditions. Does that give you an overview, Jay?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it's very, very common in your operation that, someone's going to be riding a horse or a mule up into the high country. They're going to be staying in an outfitter-style camp. Everything that you imagine with the quintessential, backcountry elk hunt, deer hunt, that's you. That's what you do.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. That's pretty much the deal.
Okay, and so let's dive back into the Colorado regs. One thing I'd like you to explain is the hybrid draw.
Yeah, no problem. And what I'll do, Jay, I can explain it kind of. I'll go over it, and then if you want, I can go over an example to get it explained a little bit better. So basically, the hybrid draw was created, going back to kind of what I was talking about whenever policies are made. It was created to appease kind of a complaint or concern that a lot of people had that because of point creep, a lot of these units that were hard to hunt, if people started applying now, basically, if you looked at the math, there's no chance that they're going to ever draw the tag. And this is a challenge that Colorado it has in it's a pretty serious issue on sheep, goat, moose, but also the high point elk and deer units. Anyways, the hybrid draw was created to appease part of that, and what it is was they took a select set of hunts that had historically been hard to draw. I think the rule they used was if it took a resident more than 10 points on average to draw that tag for the trailing 3 years average, right? The key thing to think about when you look at the hybrid draw is that 10-point and 3-year average was based off 2009. So when you look at the units or the hunts that are in the hybrid draw, they don't necessarily reflect the hardest units to draw in the state. They reflect the hardest units to draw at that point, which is 10 years ago, right? I don't know why they haven't changed that or why it hasn't been those hunts haven't changed very much. I couldn't tell you why that is. And they may have changed a little bit, and I haven't been informed of it, but I can look at those units and tell you that particularly on deer, there's a bunch of very hard units to draw that are not on that list. So it's just something for people to keep in mind. They're very good units, but they're not necessarily always the best in Colorado. So anyways, they put all these hunts on here that qualified. They're basically difficult hunts to draw, and they said we're going to take 20% of the tag allocation, and we're basically going to make it random in the hybrid draw, so you can still have a chance. The only rule was you had to have at least 5. You have to have at least 5 preference points to enter the hybrid draw, right? So that's the qualifying deal. If you can't do it with less than that. So basically, for a unit that usually draws for 20 points, you might draw it and you only have 7 points, or you only have 6 or whatever if you put in for the hybrid draw. The thing about the hybrid draw that is a little bit confusing, I think, is that it really only benefits residents. When you look at technically, the way the rules are set up, a non-resident could draw one of that 20% allocation to the hybrid draw, but under almost all conditions they're not going to. And the reason is that the hybrid draw, when it was set up, it was contingent on that it would not break the non-resident 20% allocation, right? So what you have is usually, so the hybrid draw is after, excuse me, the hybrid draw is after the normal preference point draw. And on deer and elk, antelope, those draws are strictly preference points based, right? So what happens in that preference point draw is non-residents are generally going to draw the tags before residents because they have more points when they put in for these high point units. So if a unit has 10 tags, the 20% allocation to non-residents is going to be 20%. That's all. The hybrid draw can't pop it up above 20%. So what happens in all cases that I know of, I mean, it's basically a 100% scenario, is that the non-resident tags get drawn in the preference point draw, and then when those 20% tags go to the hybrid draw, the non-resident allocation is fulfilled, so really the only people that are going to draw the hybrid draw tags are residents. Does that make sense, Jay?
Yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead. In the general draw, tell the listeners how the general draw works with the preference points, and Colorado is one of those states where you have to have a particular amount of points in order to draw that particular unit, or you don't have a chance. In other words, it's not like Arizona where 5% go to random and 5% go to those with the most points. Colorado is a true preference point state where you have to have the maximum allotted points for that unit, or else you don't have a chance. Explain how that the general draw works, and explain how how you have your first choice, your second choice, third choice. To explain how that works.
Right. So, to me, the best way to explain it, Jay, is so everybody applies for this hunt, right? Like a hunt code, right? And everybody has a certain amount of preference points then we're talking about deer, elk, and antelope only, because sheep, goat, and moose, we have a different system. But for those species, everybody lines up in front of the guy with the tags, and they have X amount of points, and they line up from the highest points to the lowest points, preference points, right? This is hypothetical. You don't actually do this, but this is how it works. They all line up. The first guy has the most points. The second guy has the next amount of points, etc. The person with the tags is going to hand those tags out down the line until he runs out, right? So it's all strictly based on how many points you have for those species, right? Everybody that puts that as first choice, right? So they're going to go through all the first choice applicants lined up according to the number of preference points they have, right? And then they're going to come back and do it with second choice the same way. It's basically random at your second choice if you put in that. So for instance, my third season used to draw out third season buck tag used to draw out almost perfectly at 0 points, right? So basically, everybody that put it in as a first choice, even if they didn't have any points, so you'd be in the very back of the line with your 0 points, and then maybe people in the front would have 2 or 3 points, right? Well, they would give out the tags, and they'd get all the way through that line. So everybody with the first choice would basically get a tag, right? But then when they got to the second choice applicants for that hunt, there might be 100 people, but they might have 1 or 2 tags left. So it's basically random to the second choice applicants, right? If they didn't get through all the first choice line, then none of the second choice guys would draw. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And then explain how I believe if you put your second choice, you can actually draw a tag, but it does not affect your preference points. Explain how that works.
Yeah, so what you can do is, and this occurs a lot, and it's important for people to understand, particularly for people who have accumulated points. I shouldn't say a lot, but there's quite a few hunts, and they tend to be hunts with poor access or something else that makes them a difficult hunt. They don't necessarily have poor quality or anything. It just they're people don't have a preference for them as much for whatever reason. So basically, what happens is you can put in the preference point code for the species as your first choice, right? And then you can put in that hunt as your second choice. So what will happen is they'll give you the preference point as your first choice, and then if that tag runs down into when I say run down, it means it gets through all the first choice applicants and they still have tags left over. They'll give you that tag as a second choice, and you'll still retain your preference points. It's a good strategy for guys, particularly so residents have a lot of access to this, but even non-residents, basically, it gives you the option where you can hunt a draw mule deer tag each year and still build up points in some certain cases. Like a lot of times you're going to have to, it's not necessarily going to be a good rifle tag every year or whatever. You might have to, like a lot of archery tags will draw to second choice. So you can put in for your preference points and keep gaining them, and then still hunt deer with a bow every year. So that's the way to do it. The thing that you have to keep in mind, and I know this gets a few people, is a lot of people will see that it draws second choice, and let's say they have 10 preference points, right? And they look at the stats and they say, well, this tag draws second choice. So if I put this hunt as my first choice on the application, I'm going to draw it, keep my preference points, and I'll draw the tag, and because it always draws out as second choice. But that's not how it works. You have to put that hunt in as your second choice behind the preference point code. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, so you have to put the preference point code as your first choice, and then you have to put that your second choice. You can't actually apply for a hunt and draw it on your second choice and keep your point. Like, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, exactly. You can't put it on, because some people will look at the stats. They'll see that, oh, this tag draws as a second choice, so they're not going to take my preference points. No, if you put it in the first choice line, regardless of if second choice people end up with the tag when the draw goes out, you still have burnt your preference points. So you have to be really careful about that.
Guys, I want to take a second here to thank the sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com Gear Shop. My friend Cody Nelson of 25 plus years is the optics manager at GoHunt.com Gear Shop, and you can reach him if you have any optical needs at all, whether it be binoculars, spotting scopes, tripods, any glassing techniques, anything you want to talk to Cody about. You can reach him at 702-847-8747. You can also send him directly an email at optics@gohunt.com. He has promised me that he'll take care of the J. Scott Outdoors listeners if you mention me, and he's been doing a great job over the last handful of months, and I get emails and direct messages on Instagram almost daily from customers that have bought optics through Cody at GoHunt. So reach out to him. I also want to thank GoHunt.com Insider. The Insider is the best Western hunting resource out there for draw odds and harvest statistics and strategy articles. Obviously, we're right in the middle of application season, and GoHunt.com Insider is the best resource out there. Make sure to go to GoHunt.com/JScott, and you're automatically going to get a $50 GoHunt Gear Shop gift card. I'd also like to thank KUIU.com, that's KUIU.com, KUIU Ultralight Hunting, for their sponsorship of this podcast. That is the gear that I use on all my hunts. Guys, I want to tell you about a special promotion that Canyon Coolers is doing. There's two ways to enter, and they're giving away several prizes. The first place winner is going to win a Canyon Coolers Outfitter 55-quart cooler with a retail value of $229 with an SC Wake C-Deck top and Hot Hands gear. The second and third place winners will all win a Canyon Coolers tumbler and Hot Hands products. There's several ways you can enter. One is on social media. You can like or follow at Canyon Coolers, and you can leave a comment or tag a friend. Also, for this promotion, The normal JScott19 promo code usually gets you a 10% discount at Canyon Coolers. It's actually for a week's period of time going to get you a 15% discount. To enter this giveaway, follow the link in the show notes and enter your email address. The winner will be announced on March 21st and will be notified by email. It's open to continental U.S. only. The cooler and other gear have been provided by CanyonCoolers.com, SC Wake, and Hot Hands. I want to thank Canyon Coolers for their sponsorship, and I want to thank you guys for jumping in and trying to win these great prizes. I also want to thank Phonescope.com, and if you use the JScott19 promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount, and OnXMaps.com, if you use the JScott19 promo code, you're going to get a 20% discount. OnX is what I use on all my hunts to differentiate between private and public land. I like to be able to switch back and forth between aerial and topo. They have a great breadcrumb feature, and it's basically replaced the handheld GPS.
Cliff, let's talk a little bit about the units that you hunt specifically and some of the hunts that you think coming up this year are going to be good ones, and any particular areas or openings that you see that, if people want to hunt deer or elk, they can call you and chat with you about. So let's kind of start with the units in the area that you hunt.
Yeah, so the units that I hunt are 25, 26, 24, primarily 25. They're all FlatTops units, and a lot of the tags are actually in the same hunt code. But probably the best season to me to hunt multiple species is third season, and we've talked about these hunts before. They're combination hunts. You have to draw the deer tag, but there's probably 90-95% chance you can draw that tag. And that is one of those tags I kind of alluded to earlier, that the reason it draws pretty easily is because the access, like a big majority of 25 is very difficult to hunt without horses. And so it draws pretty easily because of that. And so I do have some third season hunts open in the wilderness. In their combo hunts, you get the elk tag over the counter, and then you draw the deer tag. In a year, like I would say the last 2 years have been both ends of the spectrum. In 2017, third season, it felt like it was, summertime still. And then this last year, we kind of had more of a typical snow accumulation and typical temperatures. A year like 2018 in my wilderness camp, I mean, very close to 100% of people are going to harvest one of those species, and then in a good year like last year, probably close to 70% of guys actually killed both. So that's what you're looking at.
So are you telling me that in your unit, you can hunt, third season in Colorado is what everybody's after. Are you telling me that it's basically a 95 to 98, I'm looking on the Go Hunt Insider, and it says 98% chance to draw a third season hunt with you?
Yeah, so that's correct. And there's a lot of units like that. The problem with like 25 in particular on deer is that if you draw the tag and you either don't know the access points or you don't have a way to get in the wilderness, you're limiting yourself. You can only hunt like probably 5-10% of the unit. And then let's say it's 15-20% of the unit. That percent of the unit is like, you need to have OnX maps, because you need to be able to know exactly where all the private property is and stuff. You know what I mean, Jay? So you're going to find units like 25. The reason they draw easier on deer is because the access is difficult. You know what I mean? You can't hunt the whole unit. It's not like if you compare it to 44, just across the highway, it's going to draw astronomically different. Part of that is because they don't put as many tags in there and they manage it for bigger deer. But another big part of it is you can drive around 85% of 44, and it's easy to get around. So yeah, a lot of
talk about the quality of bucks. With that being said, you guys are known for having some of the biggest bucks around. Talk about that, and maybe some of the, obviously on years where it's hot and dry, it can be a little tough, but, last year you had snows here and there, and pretty good deer hunt.
Yeah, and we always do have pretty good deer hunting. Our deer hunting, I mean, most of the bucks we harvest throughout the seasons are going to be 150-inch deer up to 180-inch deer. But every year we kill one or two deer that are bigger than that, and we've had years where we've killed deer way bigger than that. So we have we kill nice deer on average, and then we periodically kill as big a deer as they get on the planet. So the thing is that there's a random element because it's the wilderness and the things can survive. It's the same genetics. 35, 25, 26, all that country. It's the exact same genetics that are across the highway in 44 that everybody talks about. The only thing is that for a buck to live to 5.5, 6 years old on the north side of the highway on 35, 25, 26, is he's got to be pretty lucky and sneaky and hide out a big proportion of his life, right? Whereas 44, there's a lot lower harvest, so you just have a higher percentage of the bucks that get to that age class. So they're the exact same deer genetically. There's no difference, and I've hunted them in both areas, and I mean they have a lot of similarities actually, even in the looks of them. So that's what you have is that it's just it's harder to hunt, and the deer, the kind of the management system on the north side is that the deer have to kind of manage themselves to some extent. And you're really hunting down survivors. You know what I mean, Jay?
Yeah. I mean, you grew up right there in that area. You grew up in 44 just across the highway, and so you know that area as good as anybody. So it's still mind-boggling to me that you could have almost 100% chance to have a third season buck tag in your pocket. Go elk hunting and have I mean, almost every year you could get a third season buck tag in your pocket and have a chance. I mean, I've seen the pictures of over the years of some of the bucks. I mean, that one non-typical you guys shot there was unbelievable a few years back. I mean, it was well over 200 inches.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's that's like a 200 and almost 30-inch deer, and so they show up. I mean, I think when it's taken me I'll be honest about this, like I've learned over time, like seeing the deer we kill, and I've realized like particularly some of the really large deer, and anybody over here in 44 guys will tell you the same thing. A lot of these really big deer, people never see them until they're dead, and what it is that they're actually a lot more migratory than people think. Like, I used to think that in a lot of this country, like, I don't know, let's take 44. I used to think that the deer would just migrate up to the top of the drainages that run into the Vail Valley, right? These deer go, I mean, I know, and they did some studies. It's been a long time since they did them, but when they were putting in the game fence on Highway 70, and then at one point they were thinking about putting in a ski resort up Brush Creek in Eagle. When I was a little kid, it was actually on the ranch that I spent part of my childhood on. They were going to develop that ranch into a ski resort, so they were doing all these studies on deer. Well, what they found is that these deer, in the Eagle Valley / Vail Valley there, they don't just go up into the drainages up on the high elevation stuff and the Holy Cross and all that. Some of them do, but a lot of them go way past that. There could be deer down here, in the subdivisions of Eagle that spend their summer, over there close to Aspen, So what I've learned is in these units, if you hunt them a while, particularly if you hunt them like early third, and then when the rut starts, they're kind of where they're going to end up being. But early third, late second, if you really pay attention where deer move on the corridors, you'll see deer that don't live there, and you end up killing them. And I can tell you, if I'm being totally transparent about it, most of the really big deer that I've killed, Jay, I've never seen before. Or maybe I saw them like a couple days before. You know what I mean?
So they're there and they're there one day and gone the next. But what you're saying is, if you know where they travel through going to their rutting grounds, you catch them, and you and your guides kind of know those areas, and you've paid attention to where those deer might be. but you've got to kill them when you see them.
Oh yeah. And then in the later you go in third, and then as you go in fourth, it's even more so the case. When you see them, you got to decide if you want to kill it or not, because there's just as good a chance tomorrow that deer has run off to another set of does or something. And so you have that dynamic. Third season, a lot of times they're just moving through to wherever they want to end up. But the one trick that I've used, and I haven't ever heard of much other folks talking about it, but if you go to areas in Colorado or any of these western states when the green up in the spring starts, like just when the first green up in the high country starts going, the green grass is basically following the snow. Watch where those deer are headed up, and they use the exact same spots to come back out in late fall. So if you look if you look at a hillside and it's greening up, and this hillside you're looking at, no deer moving across it, but you look at another side and all the bucks with little stumpy velvet on them and does just are moving across it like caribou, they're going to come back. They may come back more in like a trickle, but they come back the exact same path almost. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's
so if you go
really
back and if you go hunt those spring, like what I call like green up corridors, they're pretty much the same spots where third season and stuff. You may hunt elk in there first and second season and see very little for deer, and then it's like boom, like but deer start trickling through the same spots.
Interesting.
And
Well,
the guys know neat. That, like the guys that kill these big deer in 44 during second season and 35 during second season stuff, that's exactly how they hunt them.
Interesting. Talk a little bit about your elk hunting there, whether it be archery, throughout the seasons there on the FlatTops.
Yeah, so in archery, I tend to use, in the spectrum of drop camps, I tend to use very high elevation camps. We don't do a whole lot of archery guiding because myself and my guides are so busy with goat and sheep guiding, and then this year we're going to do some bear guiding too. I tend to do my archery elk stuff is mainly do-it-yourself drop camp stuff. I try to get people way back in there. The majority of those camps are 2.5, 3+ hours horseback ride in there, and the elk. I mean, the FlatTops. I mean, I think it's not telling anybody anything new. There's a ton of elk there. It's the White River herd is, I believe they still call it the largest herd in North America, but it's a lot of country, and it's almost all very good elk habitat. So your density's pretty, it's spread out, so you have to find them. But it's not really tough topography either. Once you're up there, you can get around. If you're patient, and you find elk and you're careful about not messing them up, you can have a pretty good archery hunt. And then that time of year also, it's just a great time to be up there. It's my favorite time for sure. And what was the other part of that question, Jay?
Well, just your elk hunting in general.
Elk
so you have archery,
yep.
muzzleloader, first season, second. You have all the different seasons.
Sure, and so muzzleloader kind of is under that same umbrella, pretty much the same time of year, that second week of September. There's a week of muzzleloader. It's the same deal for us. All my units, they draw 3 to 5 points for non-resident muzzleloader, so you do have to have the points to do it. It is a lot higher success than the straight archery hunts, just because of the weapon, obviously. On my rifle hunts, my rifle stuff is, so first season, that season is usually, there's not a whole lot of variance year to year. First season, we usually don't have like elk moving accumulations on the top yet, so each year it's pretty much about the same. You're hunting a lot of country still because the elk are spread out, but it's a good time to be up there. You're usually not fighting a ton of really extreme weather. We still hunt the higher camps, so it's beautiful open country, and it's elk only. So that one's pretty consistent year to year. Our guided stuff is going to be 65% success rate roughly. our drop camps are going to be in that band of 40 to 55%. And then as you go into second and third, it's really variable on snow accumulation on the top. A year like 2018, third and fourth season for my guided guys, I mean, almost everybody shot at a bull, if not more than one. So, but in the polar opposite of that, in a year like 2017, where all your country is still open, you don't have snow accumulation. But now the elk have been hunted a fair amount. Second and third season, you can get sub 50% success rate if it's just brutally dry. And those years are the anomaly, but it's there's variability based on that. Just because that country, there's so much that it's just like a slinky in terms of how much country the elk can be in. The deer seem to always move the same every year. Yeah, the snow will move them quicker and earlier, but the elk, it's just a matter of how much of the country's closed up with snow. So that's what you find. Usually fourth season, our elk are down, and I don't do a whole lot of hunting. I do those guided out of our lodge. In the success rate's generally pretty darn high. But a guy's got to be willing to ride every day and hunt pretty hard.
Just to be clear, your second and third season for elk's over the counter, correct?
Yeah, so second and third season over the counter. And fourth season is kind of like our third season deer tag. I mean, you're probably going to draw it, but it's no guarantee. And then I guess the other question on that is guys ask me about quality a lot on elk. All these wilderness units that are in the San Juans, the FlatTops, all the big wilderness, they're going to be managed pretty similar. So your average bull is going to be a 5x5, that kind of bull. If I added up all the bulls we've killed in the last decade or whatever, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 12 is going to be a 315-inch bull. A 325-inch bull, 330-inch bull is a massive wilderness bull in Colorado. We do kill them, but it's not the norm. And what you'll find, we found this last year, Jay, and I think we chatted about it a little bit before, is you have, in the wilderness units, your elk in particular, the inventory, if you have years where the snow doesn't help guys kill them in the rifle season, you'll get years where, your quality, all the bulls you kill are a year older because nobody, the harvest was so low the year before. So for 18, that was a year for us. We killed way more bulls over 300 inches than, right at that 300-inch mark than we typically do. And then we killed a lot of just bigger, instead of killing a bunch of 5x5s, we killed a lot of small 6s, stuff like that. And that's just a function of, just holdover bulls,
Do you think that this year, with the success you had last year, do you think your quality will be back more to the average, 5 points and the 1 year younger bull, or do you think there'll still be some of those holdover bulls?
I know there's still some of the holdover bulls because we saw them particularly late when they're accumulating, and then the elk got down really low early this year because of the snow. So I saw them before they lost antlers, and they're still, I'd say they're still above average. But that's probably because not only did we have 17 was rough, 16 was too, So there's probably, some to go. It's probably going to be middle road, would be my best guess. It's not going to be, quality's not going to be as good as 18, but it's going to be above average if you look at it over the last 10 years or whatever, because there's still a bunch of bulls that have been able to grow up.
Have you seen all of your deer and all of your elk? Has everything across the board drop their antlers, or are you still seeing sporadic bucks and bulls carrying?
Yeah, some bulls still have them. All the deer I've seen have lost them.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about sheep and goat. I know you love both of those. Talk a little bit about the amount of guiding you do in some of the areas and what have you.
Yeah, so I think between myself and a couple of my guides, we do 6 to 9 of those a year. It's tilted toward goats for sure. I think the last 3 or 4 years we've done 5 goat hunts or so at least a year. Talking specific units, the main ones that I'm familiar with are going to be the ones on the collegians that I guide for a friend over there, and then G12 in the maroon bells is going to be one significant for people looking at the draw because there's so many tags in there, and then 13 kind of between the collegiate units and then the maroon bell stuff on Independence Pass there. So all the units that are like G2, G3, G13. The other one I'll talk about is G6, which is it's over here at a Vail, but it's kind of on its own. The collegiate units, there's not a lot of change in them. Those are all really good hunts. G2 and G13 in particular. In terms of how goat hunts go, they're all going to be physical, Jay. But those two hunts, are probably the least physical of the goat hunts that at least I do, and that's because you can get a lot of the elevation on 4-wheel drive roads. There's big Jeep road system over there, so you can get up and at least get some of the elevation behind you. You can glass from the road a lot of the time, stuff like that. So, but those units also draw very difficult. G2 I know doesn't have any non-resident tags, and then G13 is probably going to draw close to the hardest goat tag for a non-resident, but there's quite a few tags in there. So that's on that end. G12, that one's been changing a lot. You spend some time in the Maroon Bells, right? Around Maroon Lake over to Crested Butte.
Yeah, in the summer hiking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I can't imagine there's anywhere maybe prettier on Earth, but maybe some of the stuff you went up in the Northwest Territories, right?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to beat that Maroon Bells, man. It's especially with the wildflowers and stuff. It's an incredible place for sure.
Yeah, it's a stunning place to hunt. But the management strategy there in the last 3 or 4 years has been to reduce the goat population pretty heavily. So there's a bunch of tags in there. I think it just depends on how you want to view it. I'll be honest with you, it's not my favorite hunt to guide, but it's still fun. And you have to weigh that against the fact that it's way easier to draw than a lot of the other tags. So if you really want to go goat hunting, it's not a bad one. You just have to realize that there's 2 things about it. One, the easy goats in there have become more and more difficult because there's been a lot of harvest, and then the terrain in there is just, and a lot of parts of it are just scary, so you have to keep that in mind. And then there are, it's like, I think when people put in for goats, sheep, and moose, they don't think about a competitive hunting environment. You know what I mean? Most people think, it's been 20 years for me to draw this thing. I'm not going to have to compete with other hunters. In there, you're going to have to deal with that. And then, a lot of our sheep units are like that too, to be honest with you, Jay. Like, people don't realize, they think that it's their once-in-a-lifetime tag, and there's not going to be any other competition. But it can be, because they're so, they end up being pretty concentrated, you can end up kind of on top of other guys. So G12 to me is kind of the epitome of that, on goats at least. But it's a good one. You got to weigh it with the fact that the draw odds are way higher. Sheep stuff, probably the most notable thing on sheep is that my unit in the FlatTops does have a non-resident tag this year. That's S59. And it's a good hunt. It's, I would say the one thing about 59 is that it's one of the few sheep hunts in Colorado that you're probably going to do horseback. And that's how we do them. They're fun hunts. I can't tell you that there's any really big sheep in there. I think an expectation of a 160-inch ram is probably about right for S59, but it's going to be easier to draw. The terrain, as long as you can deal with the horseback stuff and you enjoy, doing the backcountry camp and dealing wall tents, the terrain's pretty mild for sheep country. I mean, it's a plateau, right? So it's not, it's still mountains, but it's pretty easy to get around. It's wide open stuff. So there, it's a good hunt. I guided one of the hunters last year in there. And then S2 over here in Vail also put in a non-resident sheep tag for this year. And that's a good one, but you need to be in backpack physical shape, like go in and be hunting out of your backpack for 5-6 days to really take advantage of what's in there. It's got like a micro population of sheep. I think my personal opinion is there's probably only 35 sheep or something like that in that whole unit. So you gotta go find them, you know. And then, I guess I didn't mention G6 over there too. It overlaps with S2. That's a good one. I think it's only resident tags this year, but same deal. Good goat unit, but you gotta be that's more of a hunt for a guy that's really willing to do the physical stuff. Once you go in there, you're not coming out until you kill a goat is the idea. Not a day hunting deal, you know.
Cliff, I had heard you mention, and I didn't ask about it, but you said you're going to do a few more bear hunts this year as well. Are there opportunities if guys want to call you for some bear hunting?
Yeah, so I have a handful of them left, but I have booked quite a few, which is awesome. And they'll be fun hunts, Jay. I'm going to do them. Part of them I'm going to do from our lodge, and then the other set of them I'll probably do from like a road-accessible wall tent camp. They're 3-day hunts. There's going to be a little variability just based on what the feed conditions for bears look like this year. But if it's anything like the last couple of years, 3 days shouldn't be a problem. But those we've been kind of figuring out too over the last couple of years. Fall bears are weird. I mean, I don't know if you've ever hunted them, but you got to really key in on what they're eating and then just be patient. To me, it's amazing, particularly in the fall, how far bears will go to find a feed source that they're specifically looking for. And then when you do find that feed source, you can have certain acorn patches and stuff that 20 different bears are hitting a night, you know. But if you're looking at the wrong feed source or whatever, you can spend a lot of time looking at nothing. So have you ever hunted them, Jay?
Not a whole lot. I did shoot one last year over on the Ot6, and we've got a bunch of bears, and so I was able to actually see a bunch of them and kind of check them out, and they're pretty neat animals. To be honest with you, I think they're pretty cool.
They're awesome.
From a glassing,
watch them do their thing.
Glassing. Yeah, to watch them do their thing is pretty neat.
Yeah.
Cliff, I also want to ask you about true hunts, and I know that's probably a whole nother podcast, but I know you're really gotten into the Aoudad, and you've got a whole nother operation outside of Colorado where you set up hunts. Can you talk briefly about that?
Yeah, so everything I do under True Hunts, really I set it up for some business reasons, but also just partly because I kind of had to because of all my federal permitting with the FlatTops Wilderness guys. I kind of had to separate what I was doing in Canada and then what I was doing in Texas. So the majority of that business is the Aoudad hunting and then bear hunting in Canada. Some of it I do on a booking basis, but I always try to be there for most of those hunts. So, for instance, like the Aoudad hunts, I got back. I guess now it's been 3 weeks, but I went down to northern West Texas, and I was down there for 3 weeks, and we did a bunch of Aoudad hunts. And I guide some of those, and then I try to work with the best guys I can find. Particularly on Aoudad, it's all about where the ranches, how they're managed, all that. It's very similar probably to how your Coues deer hunting is set up, right? I mean, your location makes a huge difference. Aoudad are a fun hunt, and the great thing about them from my perspective is that they're in the off season from like all the deer, elk, all of that stuff. And they're just a new species, but it really matters where you're going. That's probably a hunt, like particularly if you're wanting to kill big ones, which that's most people who are hunting Aoudad, that's a huge factor. It makes a huge difference which ranches you're hunting, and how they've been managed, how they manage predators on those ranches, all of that makes a huge difference. And I actually on a bunch of the Aoudad, I'm such a nerd about these things, Jay, but on the Aoudad, there's not, one thing that's interesting about them is there's not a lot of research on them. and a lot of the academic work is like 30 years old. It's 50 years old when they were reintroducing them into Texas and that sort of thing. So I actually pulled a bunch of teeth on them, and I'm gonna, that you can't ring them you can't age them by rings. The rings are really hard to age on they have them like bighorns, but they have like tons of false annuli. For me, it's very difficult. I can't see how you could age them that way. So I pulled a bunch of their teeth, and I'm gonna see exactly what those big rams, how old they are, because I've heard all sorts of different information. But anyways, back to the point. I am starting to book those for 2020, and I'm going to do them in the same time period, probably in early February to late February next year. The bear stuff, same deal. There's basically 2 guys I've been working with in BC. They're all booked up for this year. I think, well, that's not actually true. I think I have a couple spots there in the coastal mountains I could still book, but outside of that, we're looking at 2020.
Awesome, Cliff. You're always a wealth of information. You still are the only person I know that graduated from Stanford University, so that's my claim to fame. As I say, I know someone that actually graduated from there, and I love seeing all the stuff you do on Instagram, and I appreciate you being a resource here for us, talking about the Colorado draw. I'm still in the back of my mind thinking about the third season deer hunts. Just the fact that
you can't
basically 100% draw for a third season tag, and I know some of the bucks you guys kill. So I want to give you a chance to let the listeners know how they can reach out to you, how they can follow along, and learn more about what you do.
Yeah, so probably the main points of contact for me are the website, which is ftguides.com, and then True Hunts, you mentioned, it's just truehunts.com, and then on Instagram, it's Cliff, CLIFFGRY, and as you pinpoint all the time, I made a typo on that one. I guess I set up the account. There's no A in there, so it's Cliff GRY, no vowel in my last name. But anyways, those are the best ways to get a hold of me. And yeah, if anybody has questions, they can give me a ring. I'd love to chat with them, and I appreciate you having me. You know what? I've been following your Instagram too. You've been hiking Camelback, huh?
Well, I've been hiking Camelback. Not very well. It's actually a pretty technical mountain. There's actually quite a few.
I've done it a few times.
Yeah, no, it's the real deal. I mean, my wife and I were hiking the other day and got up, coming from Cholla Trail, got up on the east side, and we're coming up just past the helipad, and we're kind of looking up, and we actually watched a lady fall off that cliff face that's kind of facing the helipad, literally somersaulted. She had trekking poles, and I don't know what happened, but she went literally head first and rolled probably 25 feet down that thing. And man, I scurried up there as fast as I could to see, what was going to be left of her. And her husband was there, and she was from out of state and really shook up. And yeah,
okay.
It'll get your attention. Yeah, she was okay. She was banged up. They didn't have to helicopter her out, but she was banged up and bleeding and what have you. But yeah, it's we've got some great hiking around. In the McDowell's, Camelback, Squaw Peak. There's some really good urban hiking trails around. But Camelback's definitely one of the more technical ones with some of those rock faces and stuff. But
yeah, that's a good exercise. I know there's like a section that has a pole on it, and I've gotten close to eating it on that spot a couple times actually. But yeah, no.
Well, you Colorado boys could do that in your sleep, but yeah, it's nice to have those places to be able to hike around, and it'll be good to see you when I get back up there this summer and do some fishing. I'll have to come by and take you to lunch or something, but it's always great having you on the podcast. I appreciate what you do, and encourage the listeners to reach out to Cliff if you got any questions about FlatTops Wilderness Guides and anything else that we discussed today. So take care, buddy, okay?
Yeah, thanks, Jay.
All right, buddy. God bless.